I'm hoping that this little mini series is going to answer a variety of questions for me, not just do I actually even like romantasy, although that is definitely the dominant question that I am here to find out the answer to. I have been a fantasy romance fan for many, many years. I started pursuing fantasy romance as its own genre back in 2020 after the release of House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. And back then, there wasn't a lot. You were taking a risk with indies because not a lot of people were reading indie fantasy romances. So there wasn't like big lists of like, these are the best, these are the ones that are worth your time. And in terms of traditional publishing, there truly was just not very much. And what there was marketed as fantasy, and whether it was romantic or not was something that you either had to rely on people's reviews for or just kind of figure out when you were going into it. So everything that was traditionally published that was fantasy romance was pretty much published as fantasy. So with the rise of book talk, that has obviously changed, and romantasy is now a huge genre, like one of the most popular genres. It has like the Twilight effect on paranormal romance, is what has happened with like ACOTAR and Fourth Wing and romantasy. For me, something that I'm also trying to figure out throughout this process is there a difference between romantasy and fantasy romance? Because romantasy is the term that was created by the publishing industry as a marketing ploy to make you think that fantasy romance is fun, funky, fresh and new, when actually romantic fantasy has existed for decades. And that is why throughout my channel I often use the term fantasy romance instead of romantasy, because for me they are the same thing. Like, they're literally just a combination of the words fantasy and romance to mean a fantastical story that also has a strong romantic plot. However, the more I read hyped romantasy, the more I'm starting to think that I actually don't really like romantasy at all, and that there is actually a difference between romantasy and fantasy romance. Now, I have heard that some people do believe that fantasy romance is a story that is dominantly fantasy. Like, if you took away the romance, then there would still be a plot there, and romantasy is one that is heavily romance focused, set on like a fantasy backdrop to enhance the romance, and if you took the romance away, then there would be no point reading the book. Now, I do argue that a little bit, because I would definitely consider Sarah J Maas to be fantasy romance, but I do think that if you took the romantic plotline away, while there still would be a plot, there wouldn't necessarily be anything overly special about it. It's the combination of both that makes Sarah J Maas one of my favorite authors up until her last 3 releases that I haven't enjoyed as much. So not only are we trying to figure out throughout this whether I do like romantasy at all, but if there is really a key difference between fantasy romance and romantasy, and how you can identify that. Now, the reason why I wanted to use the Fairyloot Romantasy subscription for this is because it is a new subscription, so I'm going to be reviewing the first year of book picks. This series is going to be similar in execution to the one that I did called Is the Goldsboro Science Fiction and Fantasy Fellowship Worth My Money, where I read 1 year of the GSFF picks and decided whether that was a subscription for me. Now, throughout the process of that, what I really learned is, I mean, this is pretty obvious to be fair, but subscription boxes are trying to appeal to as wide a range of people as possible. So not every book in a subscription is going to be for you, especially if you are somebody who reads a lot or are a little bit picky. Like, the chances of enjoying all 12 months of one subscription, I would say, are incredibly low. And I know that we're going to have some misses within this romantasy subscription, because there are just some tropes in these books that I do not like. So we're not judging necessarily how good the romantasy subscription is in this video, but how different romantasy is from fantasy romance and whether I enjoy that. Because the reason why I chose the Fairyloot subscription specifically for this is, one, because it's a new subscription, so all of the 12 books that I'm going to be reading and reviewing in this series are the first 12 books for this subscription. But also, I really like Fairyloot because Fairyloots are a heavily romantic subscription to start off with. I would consider a lot of Fairyloot's adult picks and also a lot of their YA picks to also be fantasy romance. So for them to have a separate romantasy subscription, there has to be something a little bit different about these books in particular that that make them suitable for the Romantasy subscription box as opposed to the adult or the YA. And I do feel like a big part of that is going to be explicit content, and I do think that all of the books that we're going to be talking about in this series are all going to have some sort of like spicy content in them. Now, full disclosure, when I decided to make this series, I was paying for the Fairyloot Romantasy subscription, so I paid for the first 2 or 3 months before I became a rep, and I am currently a rep for all of the monthly Fairyloot subscriptions, so that is the adult, the Romantasy, and the young adult. But I have always been a fan of Fairyloot, and I was a paying subscriber of both the adult and the Romantasy boxes before I became a rep for them, in exchange for my monthly unboxing videos. Now, I am very clearly disclosing this here because I want to make it clear that I receive these free of charge in exchange for an unboxing video, not to review them. And so my reviews of these books, my thoughts on these books, are not going to be influenced by the fact that I have received them for free. You are going to get honest reviews of all of the books that we read for this subscription. So I was thinking about how to split these off, like how to decide which 3 books we were going to be reading per video, but I think the best thing to do is just go through them in chronological order. So these are the first 10 books that I'm going to be reading over the 4 installments of this series, followed by a wrap-up video talking about this whole thing as a whole and like what the actual verdict is on whether I like Romantasy. I am currently waiting for the final 2 books, which will be the February and March 2025, and then we will have a full representation, like a full year's worth of books for this subscription. I do also think that a year is a really good amount of time to see a wide variety of the types of books that may be featured in a subscription. And I would say, in terms, because we are going to be talking about whether I predict I'm going to enjoy or not enjoy the books I'm going to be reading as we go through them, but I would say that my predictions on the stack, like on the picks as a whole, are 50-50. About half of them I'm really interested in, and half of them I don't think I'm going to enjoy. Now, unfortunately, the first 3 picks for the Romantasy subscription I don't actually think were the strongest. Well, I know that they weren't the strongest because in every other group of 3 that we have, there's 1 or 2 that I really am excited to read, and in this selection, there are none, unfortunately. Now, I have noticed, because I've also been a subscriber of the adult Fairyloot subscription since the beginning, the first few picks that they had for the first 3 or 4 months of that subscription also weren't especially strong, I feel, in comparison to all of the books that came after it. Like, if you take a 3-month section from that subscription as a whole, the first 3 months I would say were definitely the worst 3 books in a row. And I feel like the same has happened with the Romantasy selection. So as with all of the other series on my channel, if I want to DNF these at any point, I absolutely can. I'm not obligated to finish them if I'm not enjoying them. And I do anticipate if that happens throughout here, it will be because of either the tropes that are involved or ones that I just typically do not like at all, which I know for sure out of our first 3, there is definitely one that has a trope that I don't love, or whether I don't like the writing style or anything. Like, if it gets to a point where I'm just not enjoying myself and I don't want to continue, that is absolutely an option. So the books that we're going to be reading for this video is Lore of the Wilds by Annalisa Brana from April 2024, then A Curse of Blood and Wolves by Melissa McTernan from May 2024, and finally Nectar of the Wicked by Ella Fields from June 2024. None of these books I have heard very good things about, and a couple of them I don't think I will enjoy just because of personal preferences. But we are going to be starting off with Lore of the Wilds. Now, this one is a fae romance, which does happen to be my particular favorite subgenre of fantasy romance. It takes me back to my roots, which is of course like ACOTAR by Sarah J Maas. And if I think about all of my favorite fantasy romance series, or all of the ones that I've enjoyed in recent years, they are pretty much all fae romances. So it's definitely looking good in that regard. However, I don't think I've heard a single good thing about this book, and I obviously know quite a few people who've read it because of it being the Fairyloot Romantasy pick and it being like a year old at this point. So we're going to be giving it a try. I'm hoping for the best because I think out of the 3 books for this video, this is the one that, based on the synopsis, I'm likely to enjoy the most, but we're just going to have to see what happens. I am on page 120 of Law of the Wilds. I'm about to start chapter 10, and I think I'm pleasantly surprised so far. It doesn't hurt to go into a book with low expectations sometimes, because while I don't expect to give this a 5-star, I may give it a 4 if it really pulls together in the second half and delivers something spectacular. But I definitely do not foresee myself rating this 5 stars. So it's not like it's giving me new favorite vibes, but I'm having a good time while I'm reading it. I didn't read the synopsis at all. Like, I read the synopsis when I hauled this book, so that was nearly a year ago now, but I didn't read it before I picked up the book. So the only thing that I knew starting this was that it contained fae, and I also looked to see if it was on Kindle Unlimited, and I saw, like, do you know how they keep putting in the title of books on Amazon, like the TikTok sensation? It said something about it being cottagecore. So that is the only preconceptions that I went into this book with. And we are following a young woman called Law, who is from a human village. It's interesting because I feel like it has a little bit of a sci-fi twist, because the humans live in a fae world that they're not supposed to live in, and they keep looking to the stars for their origins, like the place where they actually came from. So because the humans are foreign to this world, they are treated terribly, and I have no idea how old the main character is in this book. She says that something happened to her when she was 18, but I'm pretty sure she hasn't said how long ago that thing was. But she has very bad experiences and has had very bad experiences with fae in the past. They come to her town after an earthquake and ask her to go to the palace with them, and when she goes, she finds out that they have a cursed library that they cannot enter, and they are very eager to get some books out of this library concerning magic and astronomy. So they think that because humans aren't from this land, they will be able to bypass the curse and enter the library, which they are correct about. So Law ends up in this vast, messy library that has been cursed and closed off for thousands of years, with the task of cataloguing everything and finding the books that the fae seek. Now, at the beginning of this video, I was talking about like what actually is romantasy, and we discussed that some people think that fantasy romance and romantasy are a different genre. Romantasy being where if you removed the romance from the book, then there would be no point in the book existing, because it is predominantly a romance on a fantastical background. Now, if we were to say that that was the definition of romantasy, then I don't think that this would be a romantasy book, because so far 120 pages in, this isn't a very big book. It's also a very easy read and quite a fast book with a quite simplistic writing style. It's more than a third of the way through, and I can't really tell you who the love interest is at this point. When Law is tasked with exploring this library, she is also assigned a guard and a couple of, not assistants, but their children who will run errands for her if she needs them to. And the guard escorts her like from her quarters to the dining hall to the library, and he, I think, is a strong contender for a love interest. But there are 2 male characters on this cover, and one I'm pretty sure is the Fae Lord that assigns her the task of collecting the books. So at this point, nothing even vaguely romantic has happened. Like, she has mentioned that her guard is not unattractive, hasn't even said like anything that makes me believe that she's overly attracted to him, aside from saying like all of the Fae are beautiful and her guard is an attractive man. So I would definitely say that this is more focusing on the fantastical elements. I will admit that I don't know what they are at this point. Like, I don't know where this story is going, but that is honestly just making it a little bit more intriguing to me. I did predict that all of the books that I read for this challenge would have spice, and honestly, given the length of this book and the pace with which it's progressing, if I didn't already assume that it was going to have some level of spice, I definitely would not predict that this would be a smutty book at all. And actually, the only indication that I have that this isn't a YA fantasy is the fact that Law said that something happened when she was 18. So I know that she is, I think, at least a couple of years past that point. Otherwise, I would say that this feels like a typical YA fantasy that I know obviously has a romantic subplot coming into it at some point, but doesn't doesn't feel like anything that I would strongly categorize as romantasy at this point. I mean, I did say at the beginning, my personal belief is that romantasy is just a marketing term created by the publishing industry to make it seem like this fresh thing, and it's just like slapping a new label on something that's existed for a long time. So I don't personally think we're going to find anything that declares romantasy like a certain definite thing, especially because it's really pedantic to have romantasy and fantasy romance as separate genres. Like, you don't have that with things like sci-fi and contemporary. There's subgenres, but you don't have two things, as far as I'm aware. I can't think of anything right now. I'm going to think about this and see if I can think of any examples of two things that are pretty much exactly the same, especially because paranormal romance also exists. And I think, I saw the new Twilight special editions on Instagram, and the fact that they labeled Twilight as the original romantasy when it's a paranormal romance, and paranormal romance has literally existed for decades. So they really are just shoving everything under the umbrella term of romantasy right now. But in terms of my enjoyment of this one so far, I am having a good time with it. I do not foresee it becoming a new favorite, but I am definitely enjoying it a lot more than I expected to, based on the vague things I'd heard surrounding this book. So as far as I was aware, or as far as I am aware, there is only one book that I know of in the Romantasy subscription books that I've received so far that is a reverse harem or why choose romance, which is I think the authors are called Elizabeth Helen. They're a writing duo. I think they're sisters. But as far as I'm aware, that is the only one in the subscription to date. However, I am starting to have my suspicions about Law of the Wilds. When I picked this off my shelf, I was thinking, because just how the cover looks is reminiscent of other why choose romances I've seen, especially like the special edition versions, although I'm pretty sure that this is just the regular cover, maybe with some foiling for the Fairyloot edition, although it does have some really nice customizations inside, like a reverse dust jacket, and I really like the printed hardcover. But I now know, I think, who this guy is on the cover, and he is not the Fey Lord. I think he's a character that's introduced about halfway through this book. And it's funny actually, because I was saying to you guys, like, I don't really know where this story is going, and immediately after I updated you, it took a little bit of a turn and kind of pivoted and went in the direction that I assumed the rest of the story was going to go. However, I do feel like things keep coming out of nowhere to create conflict in this, and I need to figure out a way to articulate what kind of stories these are and why they're not the kinds of stories that I usually enjoy. But essentially, when I'm reading, I like things to tickle my brain. So I like series or books where they make you think, and thinking is important. And then there are some stories like this where the character just makes stupid decisions all of the time, but you're not supposed to think about how she could have done 10 other things before she made this stupid decision. You're just supposed to go with it and trust that. Not even trust, like, you're not even supposed to think deeply enough to trust. You're just supposed to roll with the plot and just kind of follow where it takes you. And I don't like that, because I feel like there's not a lot of why being asked, and when I ask why, it's like, well, the answers aren't there, so I'm thinking too deeply about it. And I like to explore our options before we make stupid decisions. If it comes down to the fact that, yeah, we've thought of all these things, but this is like the most plausible decision in the moment, fair enough. But that's not what's happening in this book. It's reminding me a little bit of things like the Encyclopedia of, no, that's not what it's called, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, I think, which was a book in the adult Fairyloot subscription. That one is another one that was described as cottagecore, which, once again, cottagecore is not something that I ever would usually reach for. It has the same, I don't want to say it's fairy tale-esque, somewhat plot driven, I would say. Maybe they're more about vibes than they are about the complexity of plot. I think that there is a certain level of whimsy within the world of these stories. They contain soft magic systems. The other book that this reminds me of actually is the Tea Kingfisher book that I read. I actually really cannot remember the name of it, because once again, it didn't have like a big impact on me. And the reason why I didn't like the Tea Kingfisher is that it is like a modern fairy tale. And while I love the dark themes of fairy tales and when they're explored, stories of this nature don't really stick with me very well. I don't feel immersed in them. I don't overly care about the characters, and so I end up forgetting about them. The Tea Kingfisher book was Nettle and Bone. I thought that it was quite good. It just really wasn't for me. And this has that same kind of tone where we are following somebody who is almost being swept away on an adventure. She is definitely interacting with the plot. She's not just like a passive bystander like the Truth Witch characters by Susan Dennard are. That was like a big complaint I had of that series, but I just don't feel like there's a huge amount of critical thinking on the behalf of the main character when she's making her decisions. The reason why I'm now questioning whether this is a Why Choose Romance is because these two guys are now, I would say, love interest. She's definitely attracted to one of them and forming an attraction with another. And then as soon as this book started, it obviously started with this human girl in her hometown. Humans are oppressed. And of course, she had a male best friend. And immediately when he was introduced, he's called Grey. He reminded me so much of Gale in The Hunger Games, especially because the main discussion they were having, probably in the first or second chapter of this book, was how they should try and escape this village that the humans are trapped in, but they can't because they'll get caught by the sentries, which is such a throwback to The Hunger Games that I immediately clocked him as a potential member of a love triangle. Based on knowing that this was a Fae story and knowing nothing else, I still haven't read the synopsis. I'm interested to read it back after I've actually finished the book. I did think that this was going to be a case of like a human woman being swept away by a Fae Lord. I now don't think that that is the case, and we are going to be directly dealing with the oppression faced by the humans on behalf of the Fae and like the true origins of humans and where they came from. But an example of how I can't get behind the main character making stupid decisions, but also the fact that like I don't feel like she's thinking critically and exploring her options, is that she discovers something and she knows that she shouldn't have it, but this thing that she discovers tells her something that contradicts what she has been told by the Fae. Now, she does have a reason to distrust the Fae because of all of the oppression that her people have faced, and she herself has had a terrible experience with them. But they actually, especially this guy in particular that she'd just spoken to that gave her information that was contradicted, has always treated her nicely in comparison to the rest of the Fae, because they do treat people with outright disdain. Like, they are not kind, they are not afraid to turn their nose up at her. And this is one, like some of the others, like these two guys who are Fae, who have treated her with a measure of kindness, and she receives information from this new source that is not trustworthy. And my gut reaction right now, still at 272 pages into this, is that this information is not trustworthy, and that the path that she's decided to go on at a moment's notice, she discovered this information and she was like, okay, well, I've got to do something about it. I don't think that that's right. And I think because of the nature of this story, like maybe this is the trustworthy information, especially because the path that she's on now has led her to an element of exploration, exploring herself, her identity, things that she didn't know, learning more about the world and having a little bit more power and control over her own life and her own destiny. I feel like this information she received is actually trustworthy, but my immediate thoughts was like, no, you need to think about this. You need to double check this information. You need to kind of figure out a way to discover what is the truth, or what is more likely to be the truth, based on actual concrete evidence and information, not just make a spur of the minute decision for the sake of the plot. And that is why I'm not loving this right now. In terms of the romance though, nothing's really happening at the minute. This is still solidly reading like a YA fantasy, like a solid middle of the road YA aimed at, I would say, like 14 to 16 year olds. And I don't actually have very much left. Obviously we don't know what the future holds for this, so I mean the sequel could be extremely erotic. But right now, honestly, if we had like explicit sexual content in this book at this point, I feel like it would just feel really out of place, because the whole tone, the setting, the vibe of it does really lean into that cottagecore and doesn't feel like I don't know. Like if I hadn't gone into this knowing that it was romantasy, so expecting some kind of explicit content, I would be shooketh if that's where it kind of went at this stage in the book. But I'm still expecting it. It doesn't have to be here. It doesn't have to have explicit content or even any, I guess, spicy content at all. It's just kind of what I'm expecting from this subscription as a whole. In terms of do I like Romantasy, we are not starting strong with this vlog because I have finished Law of the Wilds by Annalisa Brana and I did not enjoy it. I ended up giving this one a 2-star rating. And then when it comes to the question of like what actually is Romantasy, it's a bad start for this vlog as well because I actually would not even consider this to be fantasy romance or Romantasy at all. This very much reads like a very standard young adult fantasy that you would have found in like an Illumicrate or a Fairyloot. I want to say around like 2018, 2019. The only thing that makes this adult is the one spicy scene that you have in here, which felt incredibly out of place. Like I said last night, if this was to include any explicit content, I feel like it would feel really weird, and it does because I feel like the general tone of the book, the general plot of the book does not have the like sophistication to be able to seamlessly like weave in a sex scene and it not feel like horrendously out of place. I feel like this is kind of a representation of the publishing industry at the moment though, because something we have to remember, I've had people defending publishers, like the big 5 publishers, in my comments, and that is just wild to me because the goal of publishing is to make money. It's not to publish good books. And I definitely believe that people who go into publishing go into it for a love of literature, especially if you're going in as like an editor, an agent, or like a marketing representative or something like that. Like I believe that people go into publishing because they care about books, because they love books. But at the end of the day, like publishing industries are trying to make a profit, and it shows. Like they're publishing books that will sell, not necessarily books that are good. And you know what sells really well right now? Spicy romance. So I honestly think that this book was mismarketed. I don't think that it needed a spicy scene in here because it was just one as well. I wouldn't consider this a romantasy or a fantasy romance as well because I do think that the romance was such a minor part of this story. It was present like for most of the way through the book, but I do feel like this is more about the fantasy plot. There was pretty much no chemistry between the main character and either of these love interests. I did resolve the one that she's friends with from her home though, like I'm pretty sure is Ace, so that is not going to turn into a romance in any way. That is like purely a platonic friendship, but these 2 guys are love interests and I felt absolutely no tension or chemistry between them at all. If you stripped the romance from this book, it would still have a plot, and honestly I think it would be stronger for it. I think that you could have had like a little bit of a romantic undertone throughout here, like a little bit of a relationship simmering, because you can just have fantasy books that have a little bit of romance that are not fantasy romance or romantasy, and honestly I feel like this is. I don't even feel comfortable saying that this is an adult book because there is that one spicy scene, but then there is also in the last 10% of this book, so after the page 300 mark, and this one is 335 pages, so in the last 35 pages of this book we had an element of sexual assault introduced, and it took a little bit of a dark turn, but once again the sophistication of the rest of the story, the complexity and the delivery of the rest of the story did not match the tone of this super dark like sexual assault element being brought in, so that also felt very out of left field and very out of place. In terms of the story as a whole, I think that the plot is very simple. I think that it's quite surface level. I think that it lacks depth and complexity, and there are no consequences to anyone's actions or decisions in this book. There are very little plot twists, and the one plot twist there is makes absolutely no sense if you think about it, like how intricate this plot twist would have had to have been played off over like multiple years. It's just not plausible to me. Like I said with the element early on in the book where the main character just takes something on faith and runs with it, I was distrustful of that the entire way through, and let me tell you, there is no reason to be. Do not distrust anything in this book. There is one plot twist that maybe you should be distrustful of, but I don't think there's any indication that you should distrust that. And anytime I was a little bit dubious about some of the main character's actions, it turned out perfectly fine, so there was no reason for me to question her like that. There are moments in this where she takes on some pretty hard tasks. Like, she does something that I feel like could have taken up the entire end portion of the book, been like, I thought we were going into the conclusion of the book, and she resolved this like really elaborate event that was incredibly dangerous within one like 15-page chapter. Overall, I just don't feel like this is fantasy romance. I don't think it's romantasy. I think it maybe includes some of these elements because that is what is popular at the minute. It's exactly the same as back in the day when like Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo was published, and that could have easily been published as adult. That is twice, if not 3 times more adult than a ton of books that have been published as adult recently that I've read and been very, very disappointed by. But at the time, female writers in adult fantasy did not sell. Young adult fantasy sold, and that is why we had people like Sarah J Maas publishing in young adult when they should have been new adult or adult, and why we now have books that very much feel like young adult published as adult so that they can have a little bit of spicy content to fit into the niche of spicy romance that is super popular right now. That turned a lot more ranty than I expected it to. I guess it just, as somebody who's really pedantic, it really annoys me when things are missold and mismarketed to capitalize on current trends, because these books are not finding their audience. A 14, 15, 16-year-old girl who's just looking for a fantasy adventure would love this book, but somebody who's looking for a spicy romantasy, it's just not going to work, babe, and it did not work for me in this instance. Now, something that I don't typically do is rate the spiciness of books, but I thought it would be interesting for this challenge for me to do that, so we can compare the scale of this entire 1 year of the Romantasy subscription. So I have written my first ever spicy scale. I'm going to run through it quickly so you guys know what I'm rating these things on. I am not somebody who is offended by explicit content. I am not somebody who seeks clean or like super fade to black romances. So I would say take my ratings as a little bit more explicit than you might expect if you are somebody who is more comfortable with completely clean romances or fade to black. For One Chili Pepper, I have tension, kissing, fade to black. So it's a little bit romantic, but the sex scenes aren't on page. For Two Spice, I have a little bit of foreplay, some moderate description, maybe some words being used like this has clit in it, but I don't think it ever refers to a like penis. I think it's like excitement or erection. For the middle of the road, like the Three Chili Peppers, we have 1 to 2 descriptive scenes and some explicit language. For Four Chili Peppers, I have multiple explicit scenes dotted throughout the book. Maybe some like kinks, some dirty talk, maybe some like horny monologues or something, or inner monologues. And then for 5, it is a lot of smut, pretty much erotica, more smut than plot, like essentially just wall-to-wall fucking. I'm getting way more in-depth than I expected to, discussing the sexual content in these vlogs. So in terms of the Fairyloot Romantasy subscription, I would expect them, I wanted to say that I would expect them to be a 3 or 4 on the spicy scale. However, this one I would say is solidly a 2. There is one descriptive scene that uses some explicit, like it's like clit explicit. I feel like it's not wrapped in metaphor. It's not velvet wrap steel like Sarah J Maas style, you know? So like it uses the actual words for body parts, but it's not overly dirty or anything. So I would put this at a 2 to a 2.5. So I guess that I would predict that all of the books in the Romantasy subscription are going to range between a 2 to a 4 on the spicy scale. I don't foresee us having a ton of 5s. Like, it's romantasy, it's not erotica. And I feel like I would reserve like 5 Chili Peppers for things like the Wicked Villain series by Katie Robert, which is literally erotica, whereas I'm expecting the Romantasy books to have at least a moderate amount of plot. Like, I expect all of these books to have a plot at least. And then in my experience with the general YA and adult Fairyloot subscription, they typically fall at a 1 to 2 on this scale. I would say that there is maybe the occasional 3 Chili Peppers, but generally, while Fairyloot are predominantly romantic in nature, the majority of the books feature romance in some way. They are not on the explicit side, and I feel like this is where the Romantasy subscription is going to come in, which is why I'm actually shocked at how mild this was and how much it felt like a young adult fantasy, because I thought that it was really like the books in this subscription were definitely going to be pushing more into a romance dominant front as opposed to a book that I wouldn't even consider to be fantasy romance, because the romance content is not super relevant to the story and not dominant throughout here at all. And at this point as well, I'm pretty sure that this isn't Why Choose. I had a moment there where I thought it was going in that direction, but at this point, like, I'm pretty confident that it's not. So that is book 1 down, and book 2 for this video is going to be A Curse of Blood and Wolves by Melissa McTernan. So this one is from May 2024, and once again, I'm not going to read the synopsis actually, but all I know about this is that it is I'm assuming a werewolf romance, wolf shifters in some capacity, which is not good news for me actually, because I don't like shifter romances very much, especially wolves. And I mean, back in the day I did, when I read like vampire and wolf romances. Like, it's interesting because when I read Twilight when I was 13 years old in 2006, I was a big Edward fan, but now looking back on it, I'm much more likely to be Team Jacob these days. But the reason why I don't really enjoy shifter romances is because of the territorialness of them. Wolves especially, they exhibit traits, I guess, that wolves exhibit in the wild. So they have like this pack culture, they tend to have like a lack of personal space, they can be overly territorial and possessive, and I don't really enjoy that vibe anymore. It kind of gives me the ick a little bit. Not to shame anybody else who likes that trope. I've said this before on my channel, you will never ever find kink shaming on my channel. You do you, hun. Like, if it's not for me but it is for you, I'm honestly just so happy for you. But wolves, not really a thing that I enjoy. So we'll see how this goes, because I am going in open-minded. It's not as bad as Why Choose romances for me, where I've never enjoyed a wolf romance. I've just realized that as an adult, they do tend to be quite off-putting for me. And once again, I haven't heard amazing things about this one either, so we'll see what I think. This book is on KU, which is great because it means that I can read it without worrying about scratching up the pages on the Fairyloot edition. But it's early days, I'm 10% of the way through, but I already have thoughts. So remember what I said about wolves and the reasons why I don't like them? This starts, very first page, he's stalking her in the woods. And that goes on for, I think I'm up to chapter 5. So for the first 4 chapters, it's just him stalking her through the woods, and she confronts him about it. So she's also aware that she's being stalked, but she likes it. So I also think that the spice level is going to be ramped up in this one in comparison to Law of the Wilds, because yeah, she has some thoughts and some feelings about being stalked. Not the ones that I would have, I feel. And she also has some of those horny monologues or inner monologues that I was talking about earlier. We'll still see how it goes. It's a very different read to Law of the Wild so far. Only like 30-ish pages into it, so I have a long way to go. And given my dislike of wolves, we'll see how far I can make it, because so far it's not proven me wrong at all. It's leaning hard into those things that I don't like about wolf shifters in general. I am sprinting all day on Patreon hoping to finish this book, so I thought I'd better bring you guys an update before it's too late. I'm past the 100 page mark now. I'm 125 pages in, and it's okay. First off, I feel like the most obvious thing to address is that for me this isn't fantasy romance because it's paranormal romance. I completely understand how paranormal could come under the umbrella of fantasy romance because it is a romance that is fantastical, but paranormal romance has existed for decades, and I feel like it's weird to call paranormal romance fantasy romance when paranormal romance has been established for such a long time. We obviously had the boom of the early 2000s with Miss Sookie Stackhouse, Miss Bella Swan, Mercy Thompson, like all of the paranormal romance urban fantasy girlies. So for me, I personally would not consider this fantasy romance. I would straight up consider it paranormal, and I think it does fall into a lot of the conventions of paranormal romance. If you've been on my channel for a while, you'll know that paranormal is really not for me. It's not a genre that I enjoy at all. One of the reasons for that is the formulaic nature of it. So you typically have, this is in the most typical, most popular case of paranormal, you will have long series of short books that are maybe around 300 pages that have like a monster of the week or mystery of the week kind of vibe and a like one main character. There is another kind of popular iteration of paranormal romance where you will, like contemporary contemporary romance series, you follow a different couple in every book. So I don't like the monster of the week, mystery of the week kind of format, and I also don't like following different couples in every book. I like to follow the same one, but with more of a expansive plot than you get in the like monster or mystery of the week formats. So it's really the formula of paranormal romance that I don't enjoy, and this is a little bit different. I don't think it has necessarily that mystery of the week element, but I do think it is going to be a pretty isolated plot following a different couple per book throughout the rest of the series. I think it's because the thing that gave me that idea, I think, is I'm pretty sure this series is called the Wolf Brothers series. I'm just gonna look that up. Yeah, the series is called Wolf Brothers, and it has been established that the main character, Rafe, the main male character, does have, I think, 2 brothers, so I am assuming that it's going to be a trilogy following each member of this family. They did used to be part of a pack, and something that's different about werewolves in this book actually is that they're hundreds of years old, where that's typically a vampire thing. Werewolves tend to have pretty human lifespans in my experience, but packs used to hunt humans, and our main male character grew to a point where he didn't believe in the brutality of the pack, so he left. But this has caused some kind of like friction between wolves and like packs in general, where some wolves still believe in the pack life and some of them want a more, I guess, modern existence coexisting with humans. Something that is very typical of paranormal romance to me is that this is set in, I'm assuming, small town America. The author herself is from New York State, so I would assume like kind of that area, and it is following a female main character who works at a bar in a small town, which is so reminiscent of things like Sookie Stackhouse, also Fortuna Swan, although I consider Fortuna Swan to be a little bit more fantastical. It does definitely have paranormal elements, so that is definitely reminiscent of like classic paranormal romance to me. And this one is also a Little Red Riding Hood retelling. Now, I haven't read any Red Riding Hood retellings, I don't think. To me, I don't understand the retelling aspect of it. Our main character is called Ruby, and it is clear that our love interest Rafe has history with a human woman called Scarlet at some point in his past, and whatever happened with Scarlet has caused him a level of trauma where he now doesn't want to be close to the female main character, Ruby. I guess we have the woods element and the fact that he's stalking her through the woods like the wolf does, but that I feel like passes pretty quickly within the first 4 or 5 chapters of this book. I'm currently 125 pages in, up to chapter 18, and she gets attacked by a different wolf in the woods, and the love interest protects her, and then he insists that he becomes like her guardian, her protector, and escorts her to and from work and stays in her kind of like remote house in the woods with her to protect her from this mysterious wolf threat. Now, I'm assuming that the wolf is tied to Rafe's history somehow, but apparently he doesn't recognize this wolf, so plot wise I don't really know how that fits in. But I would say at this point that this is a book that is definitely more about the romance than it is about the plot. The plot is just something to add a little bit of excitement to the story, whereas the dominant focus is the relationship between these 2 characters. It is overtly sexual from the very beginning. Like in chapter 1, like I said last night, there are sexual thoughts frequently where they're looking at each other and thinking about the things that they like to do to each other, and I'm 100% sure that this book is only going to get spicier as we go on. So that's currently where I'm at with this. In terms of personal enjoyment, it's not the worst paranormal romance that I've ever read. The writing actually isn't too bad. I've definitely read much worse written paranormal romance, but the general themes isn't something that's particularly exciting to me. And once again, I don't really believe in the romance in this. Like, I don't feel the sexual tension between them, and so I'm not really invested in that. And as it is a book that is more romance than it is plot, I mean, it's fine, but I'm just not having the warm gooey feelings about it that you're supposed to have when you're reading a romance. I mean, are you? If you guys don't have the warm gooey feelings but you enjoy reading romance, why? Let me know, because generally, like, I have to be invested. Like, I have to be like kicking my feet and have butterflies and think it's really cute or think it's really hot to enjoy the romance. Otherwise, for me, there's no point in reading romance. So let me know down in the comments what you think in that regard. Last night, just before I went to sleep, I did finish A Curse of Blood and Wolves by Melissa McTernan, and I am very proud of my perseverance throughout this video so far. I'm not actually sure how I'm doing it, because it's not even like I'm really forcing myself, but typically if you watch Shelve It or Scrap It or any really vlog on my channel, you will know that if I'm not enjoying something, then I really struggle to get through it. But I did manage to finish this book, and I, once again, like with Law of the Wilds, I rated it 2 stars. I did not have a very good time. Maybe because I'm reading it on Kindle, like because I read this one on Kindle, it makes the reading experience a little bit easier. I will say that the last 10 to 15% of this book, so like 35 to 50 pages, was just smut. And so when I got to that last 10% and it was still just smut, I started skimming it a little bit, because in terms of the spice level of this, would definitely give it a 4-star. Like, the sexual content is present from the beginning. We start with them thinking about each other and what they want to do with each other, and then I think at around 30-40% it does actually start to get sexual in nature in terms of the scenes, and then that is like regularly interspersed throughout the rest of the book until you get to that last 10 to 15%, which is just smut, pretty much. All of the intimate scenes in here are explicit as well, and I wouldn't say it gets overly kinky, but I would say there's some like very light kink stuff in here, so I would firmly give it like a 4 pepper rating. In terms of the epilogue of this book though, it was interesting, because normally in like a romance epilogue you will have like 3 years later, married, having a baby. The epilogue of this book was pretty much what I would expect the first chapter of book 2 to be, which they are normally included. You do normally get the first chapter of the next book included in books like this, but it's normally like as bonus content at the end, not the actual epilogue. So I'm pretty confident that book 2 in this series is going to be following the main male character, Rafe's brother Theo, and his friendship that he has with a nymph that he is refusing to take in a romantic direction for whatever reason, even though they're both very clearly interested in each other. I can confirm though that I will not be reading that sequel. Melissa McTernan also writes as, is it Laurie Gilmore? Do you know those like Pumpkin Spice Cafe and like Easter Bunny Bakery books? Like, she writes those as well, which is wild, like very much a different vibe. But I've never really appealed to those because they seem very, very cozy, and I won't be reading those either. So this is not an author for me, is what I'm saying. But in terms of like, does this mean that I don't like romantasy in terms of discovering what romantasy is? I really do not think that the first 2 books that I've read so far have any kind of weight or bearing on the answers to those questions, because neither of them are romantasy in my opinion. This one is very firmly paranormal romance, and like I said earlier, you can say it's fantasy romance or romantasy because it's romance and it's fantastical, but I really feel like that does a disservice to a very well established, very popular genre that is paranormal romance. And there are elements in here that are more modern than the typical paranormal romance, in that I feel like they have been influenced by more of the fantasy romance that is popular now, as opposed to paranormal romance, which was more popular in the early 2000s. The fact that this is a retelling is more leaning into fantasy romance. The execution, I feel, of some of the tropes is more what I've seen in line with like fantasy romance, but I firmly feel like this is paranormal romance. And while it does have a couple of the markers of romantasy, of fantasy romance, it has way more things in common with paranormal romance and the conventions of that genre. So yeah, once again, I don't like this book, but it isn't romantasy, so it doesn't actually answer the question whether I like romantasy, because this is not it. In terms of this being a Little Red Riding Hood retelling though, I did kind of get it by the end. The thing that was throwing me is that we had no grandma in here, and for me, grandma is an integral part of the Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale that is just not a part of this story. It is more about like the wolf stalking Little Red Riding Hood through the woods, but she likes it, and that is something, like I said, is very present at the beginning and also very much comes back around later in the book. Little Red Riding Hood for me is not a story that I've ever considered interesting enough to really want to read a retelling, but this is one, I guess, if it's something that you're into. I feel like if you are a big fan of paranormal, this isn't necessarily going to be a great one. One of the issues that I had with it actually is that while the smut by itself was alright, I didn't feel any chemistry or tension between the characters, so it wasn't a great romantic or smutty book for me because I didn't have any feelings towards their relationship. So the scenes within themselves were decent, but the fact that there was no chemistry or tension behind them kind of killed it for me. And then the fact that there were so many scenes without the chemistry or tension or me really caring about their relationship romantically meant that I just didn't really care for this book at all. So like, I don't know whether it's terrible, because I also don't love paranormal romance in general, but I do definitely feel like I have more complaints about Law of the Wilds than I do about this, because Law of the Wilds falls into a genre that I do enjoy, and so I can very clearly see the flaws in it, whereas I feel like one of the reasons why I dislike like this so much, while I do think that it's pretty surface level and it lacks any true emotion within their relationship, one of my main issues with disliking this is that I just don't really like paranormal romance. So moving on to book 3, I do feel like this one is going to be a little better, fingers crossed. I have looked into this one a little bit more than I have the first 2 books that I read, because last night after I finished A Curse of Blood and Wolves, I was just, you know, having a little Goodreads search, looking up how long it was, what the plot was, and the average rating on this is much higher than the first 2. The first 2 have abysmally low Goodreads average rating, so I truly don't think that it's just me, but this one is a little bit higher. I think it's a 3.95 average rating on Goodreads, which isn't amazing, especially because people who read romance tend to either rate really high or really low. There's not a ton of middle ground ratings, so a lot of romances tend to have like over a 4-star rating. So 3.95 is a decent rating generally, but by romance standards, I'm not too sure. But anyway, book 3 is Nectar of the Wicked by Ella Fields. I did look at the synopsis of this, but honestly I stopped reading it halfway through because I'm not too interested in knowing the intricacies of the story. I just kind of wanted to know what vibe I was getting into. And this one is a fae romance again, which, as we've discussed, is my personal favorite. And I thought that it was going to be a contemporary fantasy like A Curse of Blood and Wolves, but it is actually a high fantasy. I have started it. I've read 2 chapters, so it's on KU as well, so I've got it on my Kindle. I haven't marked my page in the physical. 26 pages into it, so not very far, but it's set in a place that is in between the realms of the humans and the fae. So it's a fantastical world. I think there's a human realm, this in-between place where people who are cast out of the human world go, and people who are cast out of the fae world, and then you also have the fae realm. The main character is a changeling, and she is trying to get into the fae world because she lives in this middle space and she doesn't want to. She's been treated terribly by the person who raised her, because obviously they wanted their actual child, not the fairy that was left in the place of this human child. And it features the wild hunt. In terms of fae, there are 2 different types of representation in literature, I feel. There's fae as like the cruel, mean tricksters, and then there's fae as like the 6 foot something, like strapping 8-pack warriors. I'm like a strapping 8-pack warrior kind of girl, as opposed to the trickstery kind of fae, and I do feel like it is going to lean more in that trickster direction. I feel like a good example of those 2 different types within fantasy romance is Sarah J Maas being the big strong type that I like, and Holly Black being more of the cruel trickster type. But so far so good in the first 2 chapters of this one. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it overall, obviously, whether I'm going to love this one, but I think I can comfortably say that I'm likely to enjoy this one a little bit more than I've enjoyed the first 2 books for this video. So I got a little bit carried away yesterday and I pretty much read half of this book. I think, is it 360 pages? Yeah, so I'm like 5 pages shy of the halfway mark, and weirdly enough I wasn't enjoying it a lot until I got to the last couple of chapters that I read last night, because it just has a lot of the markings of something that I would enjoy, and something about it was feeling very appealing, but then something was just like really throwing me out of the story, and I don't really know what it is. But this one is something that I would say is definitely like solidly a fantasy romance. Like I said, we are following this girl who is a changeling that has grown up in this realm in between the lands of the human and the fae. Her guardian has been waiting 20 years for her to come of age so that she can take this girl that she hasn't treated very kindly to the market hosted by the Wild Hunt once a year and hopefully trade her for her human daughter. So they go to this market and the Wild Hunt are like, we don't have your daughter, I'm sorry, don't know what you want us to do about that, and I don't really care. And the woman like pitches a fit and they end up killing her. So the main character isn't sad that her guardian is dead, but she's now faced with having to pay the rent on the place where they live by herself, and also finding money just generally to support herself. And she also finds out that her guardian wasn't dead. So the madam that runs the brothel where her guardian worked comes to the girl and is like, oh, well, you can work off her debt if you come and work for me. So the main character does go to this pleasure house and kind of resolves herself to having to work for this woman to work off the debt. And she goes to her first client, who is this man who is very intriguing to her, and they talk, they do kiss, but like nothing further happens. And he says to her, like, I am now your only client from now on, you're not going to see anybody else, wait to hear from me. So she very quickly realizes after the first meeting that this guy that she is now set to entertain is the king of one of the fairy realms. It's the winter realm, which is called Hellebore, and she tries to use this relationship to her advantage to find out information about where she actually came from and to see if she can convince the king to take her to the fairy realms to find out who her family are. Now, I think the reason why I'm maybe being thrown out of this book a little bit is I'm finding the writing a little bit fussy. Like the phrasing of some of the sentences, I'll have to see if I can find you an example when I'm reading it later, but some of the phrasing is just a little bit odd. Like the sentences are arranged in a way where it doesn't quite flow and it feels a little bit clunky, which is then throwing me out of the story a little bit. This definitely is another one that ramps up the spice level as well. I would say at the minute is probably gonna be like a 4 chili pepper level, which is fine, and I'm definitely not averse to smut at all. I like spicy books, but I am also somebody who is a fan of a slow burn. And I mean, just because things get a little bit spicy and a little bit heated early on in the book, which it does, I think within like 20% of this book, things are getting a little bit intimate, and that's fine. It's just I do prefer a slow burn and a slow workup. Like the smut does not hit for me when it comes so early in the book, because my favorite thing about romance is sexual tension. So I like that constant build of like nothing really happening but feelings like escalating until we finally get a climax, if you know what I'm saying. And I think that while I do like the relationship between the two characters to an extent, I think the fact that it did get physical quite early on in this one has made me a little bit less attached to it than I typically would be, because I feel like the relationship between these two is interesting. It does have a little bit of like a sub-dom element to it, especially when it does turn physical. Our main character, our female character, is very, very inexperienced, and so she very much lets him take the lead. He gives her commands, like she follows. It's that kind of dynamic between them, which I don't think is anything that I have ever read in, I guess, romantic fiction that isn't specifically like leaning more on the erotic side in terms of like being very firmly in the category of erotica as opposed to romance. Like it's not something I'm typically familiar with in mainstream romance. So that is definitely proving to be interesting, but overall I was kind of just coasting through this book up until those last couple of chapters that I read, and we hit a plot twist that I did not see coming. Now, the plot twist in itself is nothing crazy, like it's nothing I've never seen before. I was just kind of becoming complacent throughout the book and I wasn't really expecting anything from it. And so when this plot twist did come, it took me by surprise a little bit, which was great. And then that also has shaken up the dynamic between these two, which has once again made me a little bit more interested. Like there's a little bit more resistance on behalf of the main character at this point, because she was being a bit wet, if I'm being honest, throughout the most of this book, and not wet in the way that you would expect from a book like this. But she's become a little bit more feisty since that plot twist, and I'm definitely excited to see how that develops through the second half of the book. I think in terms of things like the writing and the plot and the story, this is definitely better and more engaging than the two that I've read so far. I'm just not quite jiving with the writing, and it's been a little boring up until this point, but I am definitely very optimistic that things are about to change in that regard, and I'm actually more interested in actively picking this up and reading it now. I finished Nectar of the Wicked. I didn't really like it though. I didn't really like it. The sad thing about this though is that I actually like the fantasy plot. I had a little bit of an issue with the writing. I found it to be almost slippery. Like I kept zoning out and tuning out, and everything that was kind of happening, it felt familiar to things I'd read before in terms of things that I enjoy. The writing style felt kind of familiar to typical fantasy romance writing styles that I enjoy, but I almost just couldn't focus on it. It was weird, and I don't know if part of that is because I didn't really enjoy the romance in this book, and so I definitely noticed that my attention would pick up. Like I'd become much more attentive at certain points throughout this book where we had plot plot twists or the plot was progressing, and then we'd slip back into more romantic sections and I just wasn't that invested. Now, there is a lot of smut in this one. I have given it a 4 spice rating. Honestly, it could be a 4.5. It isn't erotica is the thing, which is in my mind what I'm reserving like 5 for, but it does go into kinks a little bit more. It's nothing extreme, but there is a little bit more talk of kink and things like that. We have a very submissive main character who takes a lot of orders in the bedroom from our Fae King, and for that reason I felt like it was a little bit more spicy than A Curse of Blood and Wolves, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a full 5-star. But there was a portion in this book where we had 3 not really short chapters that were just pretty much smut. And that is just a little bit too much for me. I think in terms of the romance as well, like if I'm being honest, Florian kind of gave me the ick. There is also another fairy king in here who gave me the ick, and one of them is supposed to, I think, but I just found all of the descriptions of romantic relationships in here felt very exploitative for me. Like I felt like we had very vulnerable female main characters that were being taken advantage of by men who were so much older than them, and that is what I really didn't like about this. Even like when it comes down to the main character and the love interest, I think because they do have this submissive dominant element to their relationship, and our main character she's 20 but she's just maturing as a Fae female, and I can't remember how old the Fae King is, but he is significantly older than her. So the fact that he took this dominant role while also essentially kidnapping her and took advantage of the fact at the very beginning that she just wanted a family and to connect with a family and to find a home for herself, it felt kind of exploitative to me and I didn't like it. And once again, not to yuck anyone's yum, there is no kink shaming in here. If you liked the smut and the relationship in this, I'm not mad about it for you. Like I'm so happy that you did. But you know, like how, because this isn't a unique story as well, like a innocent human woman and a 500-year-old fae or vampire male, like it's something that's very familiar and that is very, very common, and typically I actually really like that dynamic. I also typically in romance and smut do like a power imbalance. There's just something about it in here that didn't work for me, where I felt like it went a little bit of a step too far. No content warnings in here because there are scenes of torture, and I did feel like the cruelty in here was a little bit gratuitous, like it went a step too far. I am not somebody who is especially squeamish. I do have a touch of medical anxiety, so some things like do make me squeamish, but when it comes to torture scenes and stuff in books, like I don't often go like, oh, I don't like that, like I wish I wasn't reading this. And in the end of this book, like I did, it just, everything in here just felt like it went one step too far for me, and I'm not normally like that in any regard when it comes to smut and how erotic it is and how kinky it is. And when it comes to torture scenes, like generally I don't mind if they're graphic. Like I read the first Law series, I don't know what it was in this or whether it was my mood and my place maybe emotionally when I was reading this, although I thought I was fine. I just felt like the author went a little bit too far and put me into a place where through a lot of this I actually felt quite uncomfortable and didn't like what was happening in this one. So in terms of a rating, I have given it a very low 3-star. It has scraped a 3 because there were points in here where I became interested and invested in it. I really like the setting. I actually like the plot. I like the war between the Fae realms in here, because the key part of this plot, I guess, is that the Winter King wants to go to war with the king of a different realm because of transgressions against him in the past. Like this king has done things to him and his family that he's not happy about, and he now wants to take revenge, but he's been like kind of hammering them, or like, should I say, like pebbling them with little acts of aggression for such a long time that's ramping up to him eventually wanting to go to war. And I liked how brutal they were in that regard, especially because it comes down to revenge and the fact that like he wasn't going to settle. Like I liked sometimes that he didn't have a softer edge that some love interests have, but then the end of this, after what the main character was put through, the way that a certain character was portrayed in the very last moments of this book, then once again put me off a lot. So I have mixed feelings about this one, because there's parts throughout it where I was enjoying it, or I felt like I should be enjoying it, but something about it was just not it for me. It is definitely though 100% darker than I expected any of the books in this subscription to go. I feel like that is going to be the thing with the Romantasy, like it's pushing boundaries that aren't normally pushed in mainstream traditional publishing when it comes to things like fantasy and when it comes to romance. And honestly, I think that that is the influence of Book Talk on the genre, like things that normally wouldn't be palatable or sellable for mainstream fiction have now become possible, and so we are pushing the boundaries a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely darker than I expected to encounter in the subscription, especially because the Fairyloot cover I feel is very misleading. Like it feels a lot happier and a lot lighter than the story itself is. So while I don't love the original cover of this one, I feel like it's a better representation of the vibe, because I would describe these edges as cottagecore, would not describe the story as cottagecore at all. So sadly not a hit for this one. I would say that this is the only valid rating though for this experiment so far, because I do still stand by the fact that these are not what I would personally consider romantasy. But then we are also here to try and figure out what romantasy is, so maybe it's just that I'm wrong, you know? So that brings us to the end of episode 1 of this challenge. It's not been a promising one, but I predicted that at the beginning. Like I didn't think that I was going to enjoy all of these books going in. Like I was pretty sure, especially about the first two, that they weren't going to be a hit, and it was a little bit more promising for this one. But sadly, I think it's just a matter of personal preference. I definitely understand how a lot of people could enjoy this one. I think I don't know whether it was the moment that I read it, but I just really was not vibing with this one. So while we have not had great success with episode 1, I am still hopeful that romantasy maybe is for me, that this subscription does work for me, and I'm pretty sure that we are going to have some hits thrown along the way, because I'm not doing this as somebody who hates the genre. Like I'm somebody who, I think I like the genre, and we're here to figure out whether romantasy is something different to fantasy romance, and whether I don't like romantasy although I do like fantasy romance, or whether they are actually the same thing and I do enjoy it. Like all of these things are what we're trying to figure out throughout the course of this. We knew, or I knew at least, or heavily suspected, that these were not going to be hits for this challenge overall, and lo and behold, they proved me right. So down in the comments, please let me know if you've read any of the 2024 April, May or June Fairyloot romantasy picks and what your thoughts on them were. Also, let me know if you're enjoying this challenge so far, if you have any predictions for any of the books coming up. Although, full disclosure, if you're not enjoying this, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do to change it, because the next video, episode 2, is going to contain the July, August and September 2024 Fairyloot romantasy picks, and it's going to be coming up very, very soon. So stay tuned if you're interested on my thoughts on any of these. One of these I'm predicting that I will enjoy. One is a predicted DNF, and one could go either way, but I'm hoping to enjoy it. Let me know if you know which is which down in the comments. But aside from that, guys, I do hope you've enjoyed this vlog if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. And I'll see you guys, not even next week, I'll see you in a couple of days. Bye! Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're a go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.